In the span of 24 hours, I had one man tell me that nobody will date a girl with a kid. And then I vented to another guy about the person who said that. And then he told me, no, that's not true. But a man doesn't want to date a girl who's slept with a lot of guys. 2 for 2.
Have you ever stopped to wonder why the world feels like it's splitting apart at the seams? Why men and women seem to be drifting further from each other every single day? The truth is, millions of men have woken up to a harsh reality. They've been played, used, and discarded by a system that never saw them as equals, only as tools to be exploited. Stick with me to the very end of this video, because I'm going to unpack exactly how this happened, why men are walking away in droves, and what it means for the future of society. You won't want to miss the final piece of this puzzle that ties it all together. If you're fired up by what you're about to hear, hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, subscribe to the channel, and click the notification bell. Select all to get every single Angry Guy video the moment it drops. Don't miss out on the truth we're exposing here. And if you want to take control of your financial future, check out Angry's Crypto Academy, where you'll learn how to buy, sell, and trade crypto like a pro, protect your assets, and grow your wealth. The link's in the description. Go check it out right now. If you're loving these Angry Guy videos and want to show some support, you can buy me a Red Bull using the link in the description. Every bit helps keep this content coming your way. Now, let's dive into the heart of it. For too long, men have been fed a lie that told them their role was to serve, to provide, to protect, all while being told they're not needed, not wanted, and not valued. This lie has been pushed so hard for so many decades that it's become the background noise of our culture. But something's changed. Men are waking up. They're seeing through the fog of manipulation, and they're realizing that the game they've been playing was rigged from the start. What we're witnessing today is a mass awakening, a movement of men who've had enough, who've seen the truth, and who've decided to walk away. Not out of anger, not out of spite, but out of a clear-eyed understanding that the system they've been propping up doesn't care about them. And let me tell you, this shift is seismic. It's reshaping society in ways most people can't even begin to comprehend. Picture this. For generations, men were told that their worth was tied to what they could provide. Work hard, pay the bills, keep the family safe. That was the deal. It wasn't just a suggestion, it was an expectation, a cultural script written in stone. Men internalized it, built their lives around it, and for a long time, it seemed to work. But then, the ground started shifting. The rise of certain ideologies, let's call them what they are, movements that claim to be about equality but ended up vilifying half the population, began to chip away at that foundation. Men were told they were the problem, that their natural instincts were toxic, that their presence was an inconvenience. And while this was happening, the same system kept demanding that men show up, pay up, and shut up. It was a 1-2 punch. Demonize men, then expect them to keep carrying the load. And for a while, men did. They kept going, kept providing, kept believing that maybe, just maybe, they'd get a seat at the table. But here's where the story takes a turn. Men started noticing something. They started seeing that no matter how much they gave, time, money, energy, loyalty, it was never enough. The goalposts kept moving. The rules kept changing. And the louder the voices got about how men weren't needed, the more men started to question why they were breaking their backs for a society that seemed to despise them. It's like a light bulb went off. Men began to see that they weren't partners in this deal, they were servants. And not the kind of servants you respect or value, but the kind you use until they're worn out, then toss aside for something shinier. That realization, that moment of clarity, is what's driving the exodus we're seeing today. Men aren't just stepping back, they're walking away entirely, and they're not looking back. Let's break this down, because it's not just about feelings or hurt egos. It's about systems, incentives, and cold, hard reality. For decades, men have been the backbone of society. They built the infrastructure, fought the wars, worked the dangerous jobs, and paid the taxes that kept the lights on. That's not a boast, it's just the truth. But while men were doing all that, something else was happening. A cultural shift fueled by decades of messaging began to erode the value of men's contributions. It started small, little jabs about how men were outdated, how masculinity was a problem, how the future didn't need them. Over time, those jabs turned into haymakers. Movements sprang up, amplifying these ideas, turning them into dogma. And before long, men found themselves in a world where they were simultaneously expected to provide everything and apologize for existing. Now, let's talk about what this looked like in practice. Men were told they couldn't sit a certain way because it took up too much space. They were told they couldn't look at someone without it being labeled as harassment. They were told they couldn't speak up, couldn't defend themselves, couldn't even exist in public spaces without risking being shamed, recorded, or worse. And when they dared to push back, they were met with a chorus of accusations: toxic, privileged, oppressive. The judicial system got in on the act too. Courts became battlegrounds where men's lives were dismantled, divorce settlements that left them penniless, family courts that stripped them of their children, civil suits that punished them for existing. It wasn't just a cultural attack, it was a legal one. And through it all, men were still expected to show up, smile, and keep the machine running. But here's the thing about human beings: they're not robots. You can't push people to the breaking point and expect them to keep going like nothing's wrong. Men started to see the patterns. They started to notice that the same society telling them they were worthless was still demanding their labor, their money, their sacrifices. And that's when the dam broke. Men began to ask themselves, why am I doing this? Why am I killing myself for a system that hates me? And once that question gets asked, there's no going back. It's like pulling the curtain off a magic trick. Once you see how it works, you can't unsee it. Men saw the truth. They'd been conditioned to believe that their role was to serve, to provide, to protect. But the people they were serving didn't see them as partners. They saw them as tools. This awakening didn't happen overnight. It's been brewing for years, maybe even decades. But the tipping point came when men started connecting the dots. They looked at the culture around them, movies, TV shows, social media, and saw the same message over and over. Men are the problem. Men are disposable. Men are unnecessary. They looked at their own lives, the endless grind, the thankless work, the constant criticism, and realized they were getting nothing in return. Not respect, not appreciation, not even a fair shake. And then they looked at the data. Divorce rates skyrocketing, with men losing everything in the process. False accusations ruining lives with no recourse. Economic systems that punished men for being men while rewarding others for doing less. It was all there, plain as day. And once men saw it, they couldn't unsee it. So what did they do? They walked away. Not in some dramatic Hollywood-style exit, but quietly, methodically, deliberately. They stopped playing the game. They stopped chasing relationships that offered nothing but chaos and manipulation. They stopped pouring their energy into a society that didn't value them. They stopped being the safety net for people who'd spent years telling them they weren't needed. And let me tell you, this is where the story gets really interesting. Because when men walk away, the whole system starts to wobble. See, men weren't just participants in society, they were the foundation. And when you pull the foundation out from under a house, the whole thing starts to crumble. Let's talk about what this looks like in the real world. Women who for years relied on men as a fallback, whether it was for financial support, emotional validation, or just someone to pick up the tab, are starting to feel the pinch. Social media is full of it. Women posting videos, crying into their cameras, wondering why men aren't stepping up anymore. They're talking about how hard it is to pay rent, to buy groceries, to keep the lights on. They're asking where all the good men went, as if men just vanished into thin air. But here's the truth: men didn't vanish. They just stopped showing up for a game they knew they couldn't win. They stopped being the plan B that women always counted on. And now women are facing a reality they never prepared for, a world where the safety net they took for granted is gone. This isn't about gloating or pointing fingers, it's about cause and effect. For years, women were told they didn't need men, that they could do it all on their own, that the state would take care of them if things went south. And for a while, that seemed to work. The economy was humming, government programs were flush with cash, and men were still there, quietly holding things together. But then the music stopped. Inflation kicked in. The cost of living skyrocketed. And those government programs, they're running on fumes. The state can't play sugar daddy anymore, and men aren't stepping in to fill the gap. Why would they? Hey guys, in a world pushing you to own nothing and be happy, crypto is your key to survival. Join Angry's Crypto Academy to master buying, selling, and trading crypto. Make huge profits and safeguard your wealth. Plus, discover the one crypto virtually no one is talking about, poised to create new millionaires in the upcoming bull run. The link is in the description of the video below. Go check it out now. After years of being told they're not needed, after years of being used and discarded, men have finally said enough. They're keeping their money, their time, their energy for themselves. And the results are stark. Men, it turns out, are thriving. When you strip away the expectations, the demands, the constant pressure to perform for a system that doesn't care about you, something remarkable happens. Men start to rediscover themselves. They start focusing on what makes them happy: hobbies, fitness, travel, learning new skills. They start living simpler, more intentional lives. Minimalism isn't just a buzzword for them, it's a way of life. Men are cutting out the noise, the drama, the endless obligations, and replacing them with things that bring peace and purpose. They're not lonely, they're free. And that freedom is something society never prepared for. Meanwhile, the system that relied on men's labor, men's taxes, men's sacrifices is starting to crack. Businesses are feeling it. Fewer men spending money on dates, on gifts, on things they don't need. The housing market's feeling it. Fewer men stepping up to co-sign mortgages or cover rent. Even the social fabric's feeling it. Fewer men participating in communities, in charities, in the countless little ways they used to hold things together. This isn't a tantrum or a protest, it's a reckoning. Men have realized that they don't need to set themselves on fire to keep others warm. And as they walk away, the world is starting to see just how much it relied on them. Let's keep peeling back the layers of this, because what we're talking about here isn't just a trend, it's a fundamental shift in how society operates. When men walk away, it's not just about them stepping back from relationships or dating. It's about them withdrawing their energy, their resources, their very presence from a system that's been taking them for granted for far too long. And make no mistake, this withdrawal is having ripple effects that are shaking the foundations of everything we've been taught to believe about how the world works. The narrative used to be simple: men provide, women receive, and everyone benefits. But that narrative was built on a lie that assumed men would keep showing up no matter how much they were disrespected, devalued, or discarded. Well, the lie's been exposed, and the consequences are unfolding in real time. Think about what happens when you pull a single thread from a tapestry. At first, it might not seem like much, just a small snag, barely noticeable. But as you keep pulling, the whole thing starts to unravel. That's what's happening right now. Lindan, men were the thread holding so much of society together. And now that they're pulling back, the entire fabric is coming apart. Businesses are struggling because men aren't spending like they used to. Restaurants, bars, entertainment venues, they're all feeling the hit. Why? Because men aren't shelling out for expensive dates, lavish gifts, or frivolous purchases to impress people who don't value them. They're keeping their money in their pockets, investing in themselves, or saving for a future they can control. And this isn't just about individual choices, it's about a collective shift that's reshaping the economy at its core. Now, let's talk about the housing market, because this is where things get really stark. For years, men were the ones signing on the dotted line mortgages, leases, utility bills. They were the ones taking on the financial burden, often for the sake of relationships or families they were told they needed to build. But when men walk away, they're not just walking away from dating, they're walking away from those obligations. Fewer men are buying homes, fewer men are co signing leases, fewer men are stepping up to cover the rent for someone else. And what's the result? The housing market is starting to wobble. Landlords are struggling to fill vacancies. Property values are stagnating in some areas, and the whole system is feeling the strain. It's not just about money, it's about the absence of men's willingness to carry the load for a society that's turned its back on them. But it's not just the economy that's feeling the pinch, it's the social fabric itself. Men have always been the glue in so many communities. They were the volunteers, the organizers, the ones who showed up to fix things, build things, keep things running, whether it was coaching a youth sports team, helping out at a local charity, or just being the guy who mowed the neighbor's lawn when they couldn't. Men were there, not because they wanted praise, but because it was part of who they were. But when you spend decades telling men they're not needed, when you vilify them for their very existence, don't be surprised when they stop showing up. And that's exactly what's happening. Community groups are struggling to find volunteers. Local organizations are short on manpower. Even the small, everyday acts of kindness that men used to do without thinking twice, they're fading away. Because men have realized something profound. They don't owe anyone anything. This is where the story gets even more compelling because it's not just about what men are walking away from, it's about what they're walking toward. When you strip away the expectations, the demands, the constant pressure to perform for a system that doesn't care about you, you create space for something new. Men are rediscovering themselves in ways that society never anticipated. They're focusing on their passions, their goals, their own happiness. They're hitting the gym, learning new skills, traveling to places they've always wanted to see. They're building lives that don't revolve around serving others, but instead revolve around self fulfillment. And let me tell you, this is a game changer because when men start prioritizing themselves, they unlock a level of freedom and clarity that's been buried under years of obligation. Yep. Let's paint a picture here. Imagine a man in his 30s, maybe his 40s. For years, he's been grinding, working long hours, paying bills, chasing relationships that never quite worked out. He's been told he's not good enough, not successful enough, not sensitive enough, not whatever enough. He's been told to sit down, shut up, and keep providing. But one day, he looks in the mirror and asks himself, why am I doing this? And that's when it clicks. He doesn't need to keep running on the hamster wheel. He doesn't need to keep chasing approval from people who'll never give it. So he steps off. He starts saying no. No to the endless demands, no to the manipulative games, no to the societal script that's been written for him. And in that moment, he starts to live. This man starts small. Maybe he cuts out the things that don't matter, subscriptions he doesn't use, social events that drain him, relationships that feel like one way streets. He starts focusing on what does matter. Maybe it's his health. He starts eating better, lifting weights, running in the mornings. Maybe it's his mind. He picks up books he's always wanted to read, learns a new language, dives into a hobby he's neglected. Maybe it's his spirit. He takes time to reflect, to find peace, to figure out what really makes him tick. And as he does this, something incredible happens. He realizes that being alone isn't the same as being lonely. He realizes that he doesn't need external validation to feel whole. He realizes that he's enough just as he is. This is the heart of what's happening right now. Men are reclaiming their lives, their time, their energy. They're rejecting the idea that their worth is tied to what they can do for others. And this isn't just a personal transformation, it's a cultural one. Because when millions of men start doing this, it sends shockwaves through the system. It challenges every assumption we've been taught about gender roles, about relationships, about society itself. Men aren't just walking away from women or dating, they're walking away from a worldview that's been suffocating them for generations. And as they do, they're creating something new, a way of life that's simpler, more authentic, more grounded in reality. But let's not sugarcoat this. The system isn't going to let go without a fight. The same forces that spent decades telling men they're not needed are now panicking because men are actually listening. You see it everywhere: articles, videos, social media posts, all asking the same question: where have all the good men gone? The irony is thick, isn't it? For years, men were told to go away, to step aside, to make room for a world that didn't need them. And now that they've done exactly that, the same voices are scrambling to figure out why things are falling apart. They're starting to realize that men weren't just a convenience, they were a necessity. And without them, the whole house of cards is starting to collapse. Let's talk about what this collapse looks like because it's not abstract. It's happening right in front of us. Women are struggling in ways they never expected. The cost of living is through the roof. Rent, groceries, utilities, everything's more expensive than ever. And without men as a fallback, without that safety net they've relied on for so long, many women are finding it impossible to keep up. Social media is a window into this reality. You see women posting about how they can't afford their bills, how they're working multiple jobs just to make ends meet, how they're exhausted and overwhelmed. They're wondering why men aren't stepping in to help, why they're not offering to pay for dinners or cover the rent like they used to. But the answer is simple: men are done being the backup plan. This isn't about cruelty or revenge, it's about self preservation. Men have spent years being used, manipulated, taken for granted. They've been expected to provide without question, to sacrifice without reward, to endure without complaint. And they've finally reached their limit. They've realized that the only way to protect themselves is to stop participating in a system that's designed to exploit them. So they're keeping their money, their time, their energy for themselves. They're investing in their own futures, their own happiness, their own peace. And as they do, they're exposing a truth that's been hidden for too long. The system only worked because men were willing to prop it up. Now let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture, because this isn't just about individuals, it's about society as a whole. When men walk away, it's not just relationships or dating that get affected. It's the economy, the workforce, the family structure, the very way we organize our communities. Men have always been the ones taking on the toughest, most dangerous jobs: construction, manufacturing, mining, you name it. They've been the ones working overtime, taking risks, making sacrifices to keep the wheels turning. But when men start opting out, those wheels start to grind to a halt. Industries are already feeling the shortage. Fewer men are entering trades. Fewer men are willing to work themselves to the bone for a system that doesn't value them. And this isn't just a short term problem, it's a long term crisis. The family structure is another casualty. For years, men were told they were essential to families, not just as providers, but as role models, protectors, stabilizers. But when you spend decades demonizing men, when you make it impossible for them to trust relationships, when you rig the system so that men lose everything in divorce or custody battles, don't be surprised when they stop signing up. Fewer men are getting married, fewer men are starting families, fewer men are willing to take on the risks that come with commitment. And the result? Birth rates are plummeting, communities are shrinking, the very foundation of society, the family unit, is eroding. And while some might cheer this as progress, the reality is far less rosy. Societies need families to function, to grow, to thrive. And without men's participation, that foundation is crumbling. But here's where the narrative flips again. While society struggles to adapt to this new reality, men are finding their stride. They're not just surviving, they're thriving. When you free yourself from the weight of other people's expectations, when you stop trying to live up to a script that was never written for your benefit, you unlock a level of potential you never knew you had. Men are starting businesses, pursuing passions, building communities of like minded people who value authenticity over obligation. They're living lives that are leaner, meaner, more focused on what truly matters. And this isn't just a feel good story, it's a revolution. Because when men prioritize themselves, they're not just changing their own lives, they're changing the world. Let's talk about what this looks like on the ground. Men are embracing minimalism, not just in their possessions, but in their relationships, their commitments, their entire approach to life. They're cutting out the noise, toxic friendships, draining obligations, endless distractions, and replacing them with purpose. They're investing in themselves, physically, mentally, emotionally. They're hitting the gym, not to impress anyone, but to feel strong, to feel alive. They're learning new skills, not to climb some corporate ladder, but to enrich their own lives. They're traveling, exploring, taking risks, not because they're running from something, but because they're running towards something, a life that's theirs on their terms. And this is where the system starts to panic. Because men who are self sufficient, men who don't need external validation, men who aren't tethered to the old script, they're dangerous. Not in a violent or destructive way, but in a way that threatens the status quo. They can't be controlled. They can't be guilted into compliance. They can't be manipulated into serving a system that doesn't serve them. And that's why you're seeing so much pushback. The same voices that spent years telling men they're not needed are now scrambling to bring them back, to shame them, to guilt them, to bribe them into returning to the fold. But it's too late. The genie's out of the bottle, and men aren't going back. We're deep in the thick of it now, and the picture is becoming clearer with every passing moment. Men walking away isn't just a personal choice, it's a cultural earthquake, and the aftershocks are being felt everywhere. The system that relied on men's compliance, their labor, their sacrifices, is starting to crumble under its own weight, and the panic is palpable. You can see it in the headlines, in the social media posts, in the endless stream of content trying to figure out why men are disappearing from society. But they're not disappearing, they're choosing themselves. They're opting out of a game that was never designed for them to win. And in doing so, they're exposing the fragility of a world that took them for granted for far too long. Let's zoom in on the cultural forces that brought us to this point, because this didn't happen in a vacuum. For decades, men have been bombarded with messages that their very existence is a problem. It started subtly. Jokes in sitcoms, stereotypes in movies, little digs about how men are bumbling or outdated. But over time, those digs turned into something more insidious. Entire movements sprang up, cloaked in the language of fairness, but wielding a very different agenda. Men were labeled as toxic, their instincts vilified, their contributions erased. The term masculinity became a punchline, a shorthand for everything wrong with the world. And while this was happening, men were still expected to show up, to provide, to protect, to keep the machine running without so much as a thank you. This wasn't just a cultural shift, it was a psychological assault. Men were told they couldn't express themselves, couldn't defend themselves, couldn't even sit comfortably without being criticized. Terms were invented to shame them for existing. Manspreading, mansplaining, you name it. Public spaces became minefields where a glance, a word, or even silence could be twisted into an offense. And the consequences weren't just social, they were legal, financial, existential. Men faced lawsuits, job losses, public humiliation, all for the crime of being themselves. The courts got in on the act with systems that seemed designed to punish men at every turn, divorce settlements that stripped them of everything, custody battles that left them estranged, accusations that could ruin lives with no evidence required. It was a 1-2 punch: tear men down, then demand they keep building. But here's where the story takes a fascinating turn. Men aren't just victims of this, they're adapters. They're problem solvers by nature. And when they saw the system turning against them, they didn't just sit there and take it. They started to analyze, to connect the dots, to see the bigger picture. They looked at the culture, movies, music, media, and saw the same narrative over and over. Men are the problem. Men are disposable. Men are unnecessary. They looked at their own lives, the endless grind, the thankless work, the constant criticism, and realized they were getting nothing in return. And then they looked at the data: skyrocketing divorce rates, with men losing homes, savings, and children, false accusations destroying reputations with no recourse, economic systems that punished men while rewarding others for less. It was all there, undeniable. And once men saw it, they couldn't unsee it. This awakening wasn't loud or flashy. It wasn't a protest march or a viral hashtag. It was quiet, deliberate, and deeply personal. Men started asking themselves hard questions. Why am I sacrificing so much for a system that despises me? Why am I chasing relationships that bring nothing but chaos? Why am I pouring my energy into a society that sees me as a tool? And once those questions took root, the answers became obvious. Men didn't need to keep playing a losing game. They didn't need to keep proving themselves to people who'd never be satisfied. They didn't need to keep carrying a world that refused to carry them back. So they walked away. Not with anger, not with bitterness, but with clarity and resolve. Let's talk about what this walking away looks like, because it's not just about saying no to dating or relationships, it's about saying no to an entire worldview. Men are opting out of the expectations that have been placed on them for generations. They're refusing to be the provider, the protector, the fixer when there's no reward for it. They're stepping back from a culture that demands their labor but offers nothing in return. And this withdrawal is having effects that are both immediate and profound. Businesses are feeling it. Fewer men spending money on things they don't need. Fewer men chasing status symbols to impress others. Communities are feeling it. Fewer men volunteering. Fewer men stepping up to fill the gaps. Even the economy is feeling it. Fewer men taking on debt. Fewer men fueling the consumer machine that keeps the system humming. But the most striking effect is on the social landscape. Women who for years relied on men as a safety net, whether for financial support, emotional validation, or just someone to lean on, are starting to realize that the net is gone. You see it everywhere: posts on social media, videos on platforms like TikTok, women wondering why men aren't stepping up anymore. They're talking about how hard it is to make ends meet, how they're struggling to pay bills, how they're exhausted from trying to do it all on their own. They're asking where the good men went, as if men just vanished without a trace. But the truth is, men didn't vanish. They walked away. They stopped being the fallback plan, the plan B, the one who'd always be there no matter how they were treated. And now women are facing a reality they never planned for. This isn't about pointing fingers or assigning blame, it's about understanding cause and effect. For decades, women were told they didn't need men, that they could do it all themselves, that the state would step in if things got tough. And for a while, that seemed to hold true. The economy was strong, government programs were well funded, and men were still there quietly holding things together. But then the cracks started to show. Inflation soared, the cost of living became unbearable, and those government programs, they're stretched thin, barely able to keep up. The state can't play the role of provider anymore, and men aren't stepping in to fill the void. Why would they? After years of being told they're not needed, after years of being used and discarded, men have finally said no more. They're keeping their resources for themselves, and the results are undeniable. Let's shift gears and talk about what men are doing with this newfound freedom, because this is where the story gets truly inspiring. When men walk away from a system that's been exploiting them, they don't just sit around, they build something better. They're focusing on themselves in ways that society never expected. They're hitting the gym, not to impress anyone, but to feel strong, to feel capable. They're picking up new skills: coding, woodworking, cooking, you name it, not to climb some corporate ladder, but to enrich their own lives. They're traveling, exploring, taking risks, not because they're running from something, but because they're chasing a life that's theirs on their terms. This is the essence of what's happening right now. Men are rediscovering their purpose. They're rejecting the idea that their worth is tied to what they can do for others. They're embracing minimalism, not just in their possessions, but in their entire approach to life. They're cutting out the noise, toxic relationships, pointless obligations, endless distractions, and replacing them with clarity. They're investing in themselves physically, mentally, emotionally. And as they do, they're unlocking a level of freedom that's been buried under years of expectation. They're realizing that being alone isn't the same as being lonely. They're realizing that they don't need external validation to feel whole. They're realizing that they're enough just as they are. This transformation isn't just personal, it's cultural. When millions of men start prioritizing themselves, it challenges every assumption we've been taught about how society should work. Men aren't just walking away from relationships, they're walking away from a script that was never written for their benefit. They're rejecting the idea that they have to sacrifice everything for a system that doesn't value them. And as they do, they're creating a new way of life, one that's simpler, more authentic, more grounded in reality. They're building communities of like minded people, not based on obligation, but based on mutual respect and shared values. They're starting businesses, pursuing passions, living lives that are leaner, meaner, more focused on what truly matters. But let's not kid ourselves. The system isn't going to let this happen without a fight. The same forces that spent decades telling men they're not needed are now in full panic mode. You see it in the media, articles, think pieces, videos, all trying to figure out why men are opting out. You see it in the cultural pushback, attempts to shame men, to guilt them, to bribe them into coming back. But it's not working. Men have seen through the manipulation and they're not buying it anymore. They've learned to trust their own eyes, their own experiences, their own reasoning over the words of a system that's been lying to them for years. And that's what makes this moment so powerful. Men aren't just walking away, they're staying away. Let's talk about what this means for the future, because this isn't just a moment, it's a turning point. When men opt out, they're not just changing their own lives, they're changing the trajectory of society. The economy is already feeling the strain. Fewer men spending, fewer men taking on debt, fewer men fueling the consumer machine. The workforce is feeling it too. Fewer men entering high risk, high reward fields, fewer men willing to work themselves to the bone for a system that doesn't care. Even the social structure is shifting. Fewer men getting married, fewer men starting families, fewer men participating in the institutions that used to define society. This isn't a blip, it's a paradigm shift. And here's the kicker: while the system scrambles to adapt, men are thriving. They're living lives that are more fulfilling, more intentional, more aligned with who they are. They're not lonely, they're free. They're not lost, they're found. They're not running from responsibility, they're running toward purpose. And this is what the system can't handle. Men who are self sufficient, men who don't need external validation, men who aren't tethered to the old script. They're a threat, not because they're destructive, but because they're independent. They can't be controlled, they can't be manipulated, and they can't be guilted into compliance. And that's why the pushback is so fierce. But the pushback is failing. Men have seen the truth and they're not going back. They've learned to trust their own pattern recognition over the promises of a system that's been exploiting them for generations. They've learned to value their own peace over the chaos of a world that demands their sacrifice. They've learned to live for themselves, not for others. And as they do, they're rewriting the rules, not just for themselves, but for everyone. They're showing that there's another way to live, a way that doesn't require endless sacrifice, endless obligation, endless servitude. They're showing that freedom is possible, that purpose is possible, that happiness is possible. This is the heart of the story we're telling today. Men walking away isn't just about opting out, it's about opting in. It's about choosing a life that's worth living, a life that's yours on your terms. It's about rejecting a system that's been using you and building something better in its place. It's about taking back your power, your time, your energy, and using it to create a world that reflects who you are, not who you've been told to be. And as more men do this, the world is changing, not with a bang, but with a quiet, unstoppable force. We're at a crossroads now. and the stakes couldn't be higher. The phenomenon of men walking away is no longer just a whisper in the background, it's a roar that's shaking the very foundations of society. You see that this isn't about a few disgruntled guys opting out. It's about millions of men across generations, across cultures, saying enough is enough. They're done playing a game that's rigged against them, done pouring their energy into a system that spits in their face, done sacrificing for a world that doesn't value their contributions. And as they step back, the cracks in the system are becoming impossible to ignore. The economy, the social structure, the cultural narrative, they're all buckling under the weight of their own contradictions. Let's unpack this because the story we're telling here isn't just about what's happening now, it's about what's coming next. Let's start with the systemic failures that brought us here, because this moment didn't come out of nowhere. For decades, society has been operating on a set of assumptions that were never sustainable. The first assumption was that men would always show up no matter how badly they were treated. It was taken for granted that men would keep working the dangerous jobs, paying the taxes, building the infrastructure, all while being told they were obsolete. The second assumption was that the system could keep vilifying men without consequences. Movements that claimed to be about fairness turned into campaigns of demonization, painting men as the source of all problems while demanding their continued labor. The third assumption was that the state could replace men's role in society, stepping in with welfare programs, subsidies, and safety nets to fill the gap. But those assumptions were built on sand and the tides coming in. The first assumption, that men would always show up, has been shattered. Men are human beings, not machines. You can't push people to the breaking point, strip them of respect, and expect them to keep going like nothing's wrong. For years, men internalized the message that their worth was tied to what they could provide. They worked grueling hours, took on crushing debt, sacrificed their health and happiness, all to meet the expectations placed on them. But when those expectations came with a side of contempt, when men were told they were toxic, privileged, unnecessary, they started to question the deal. Why keep showing up for a system that hates you? Why keep giving when you get nothing in return? That question, once asked, changes everything, and millions of men have asked it, answered it, and walked away. The second assumption, that you could vilify men without consequences, has also collapsed. The cultural assault on men wasn't just a few harsh words, it was a sustained campaign to erode their value. Media, academia, and public discourse all played a role, amplifying narratives that painted men as the enemy. Terms were invented to shame them for existing, behaviors were criminalized, and entire systems were weaponized to punish them. Men couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't even breathe without risking public shaming or legal repercussions, and yet they were still expected to provide, to protect, to perform. It was a contradiction so blatant, it's almost laughable. Except it wasn't funny for the men whose lives were dismantled. But men didn't just sit there and take it, they adapted. They saw the patterns, connected the dots, and realized the system wasn't broken. It was designed to exploit them, so they opted out. The third assumption, that the state could replace men's role, was the most delusional of all. For a while, it seemed plausible. Government programs expanded, promising to support those who needed it, and many believed the state could be a permanent safety net. Women, in particular, were told they didn't need men, that the state would step in with welfare, subsidies, and protections. But here's the problem, the state isn't a bottomless well, it relies on tax revenue. And guess who's been paying the lion's share of those taxes? Men. When men walk away, when they stop working overtime, stop taking on debt, stop fueling the consumer economy, the state's coffers start to dry up. Add in inflation, rising costs, and a global economy that's teetering on the edge, and you've got a recipe for collapse. The state can't keep its promises, and without men as a fallback, the whole system is starting to implode. Let's talk about what this implosion looks like, because it's not theoretical, it's happening right now. The economy is one of the first casualties. Men have always been the engine of consumer spending, not just for themselves, but for others. They paid for dates, bought gifts, took on mortgages, covered bills, all to meet the expectations of a society that told them it was their role. But when men stop participating, that engine stalls. Restaurants are emptier, retail stores are struggling, luxury brands are taking a hit. Why? Because men aren't spending to impress anymore. They're keeping their money, investing in themselves, or saving for a future they can control. This isn't just a blip, it's a structural shift. Businesses that relied on men spending are scrambling, and the ripple effects are hitting every corner of the economy. The housing market is another flashpoint. Men have historically been the ones signing leases, buying homes, taking on the financial risks of property ownership. But when men walk away, they're not just saying no to relationships, they're saying no to those obligations. Fewer men are buying houses, fewer men are co signing leases, fewer men are stepping up to cover rent for someone else. The result? Vacancies are up, property values are stagnating in some areas, and landlords are feeling the squeeze. This isn't just about individual choices, it's about a collective withdrawal that's shaking the foundations of an industry. And when the housing market wobbles, it drags everything else with it: construction, real estate, home goods, you name it. But the most profound impact is on the social fabric. Men have always been the unsung heroes of communities. They were the ones who volunteered, who fixed things, who stepped up when no one else would. Not for glory, but because it was who they were. But when you spend decades telling men they're not needed, when you make them feel like outsiders in their own society, don't be surprised when they stop showing up. Community organizations are struggling to find volunteers. Charities are short on manpower. Even the small, everyday acts of kindness that men used to do, helping a neighbor, mentoring a kid, fixing a broken fence, are fading away. This isn't about men being selfish. It's about men realizing they don't owe a system that's turned its back on them. Now, let's flip the script and talk about what men are gaining from this, because this isn't just a story of loss, it's a story of liberation. When men walk away from a system that's been exploiting them, they don't just retreat, they rebuild. They're focusing on themselves in ways that society never anticipated. They're hitting the gym, not to impress anyone, but to feel strong, to feel alive. They're learning new skills: coding, carpentry, investing, not to climb some corporate ladder, but to enrich their own lives. They're traveling, exploring, taking risks, not because they're running from something, but because they're chasing a life that's theirs on their terms. This is what freedom looks like: not the absence of responsibility, but the presence of choice. And this shift is about more than just individual men, it's about a cultural renaissance. Men are rediscovering their purpose, their passions, their sense of self. They're rejecting the idea that their worth is tied to what they can do for others. They're embracing a minimalist approach, not just in their possessions, but in their entire worldview. They're cutting out the noise, toxic relationships, pointless obligations, endless distractions, and replacing them with clarity. They're investing in themselves, physically, mentally, emotionally, and the results are staggering. Men are healthier, happier, more focused than they've been in generations. They're not lonely, they're free, they're not lost, they're found. Let's paint a picture of what this looks like in practice. Imagine a man who spent years grinding, working long hours, paying bills, chasing relationships that never worked out. He's been told he's not enough, been criticized for existing, been expected to keep providing no matter what. But one day, he wakes up and decides he's done. He starts saying no. No to the endless demands, no to the manipulative games, no to the societal script that's been written for him. He starts small, cutting out subscriptions he doesn't need, skipping social events that drain him, stepping back from relationships that feel one sided. And as he does, he creates space for something new. This man starts focusing on what matters. He hits the gym, not to impress anyone, but to feel strong, to push his limits. He picks up a hobby. Maybe it's woodworking, maybe it's photography, not to show off, but to create something meaningful. He starts reading, learning, exploring ideas he's never had time for. He takes a trip, not to escape, but to see the world through fresh eyes. And as he does this, he realizes something profound. He doesn't need external validation to feel whole. He doesn't need to prove himself to anyone. He's enough just as he is. This is the transformation that's happening right now, not just for one man, but for millions. It's a quiet revolution and it's changing everything. But the system isn't going to let this happen without a fight. The same forces that spent decades telling men they're not needed are now in full damage control mode. You see it in the media, articles, videos, think pieces, all trying to figure out why men are opting out. You see it in the cultural pushback, attempts to shame men, to guilt them, to bribe them into coming back. But it's not working. Men have seen through the lies and they're not falling for it anymore. They've learned to trust their own experiences, their own reasoning, their own eyes over the promises of a system that's been exploiting them for generations. And that's what makes this moment so powerful. Men aren't just walking away, they're staying away. Let's talk about what this means for the long term, because this isn't just a phase, it's a new reality. When men opt out, they're not just changing their own lives, they're reshaping society. The economy is already feeling the strain. Fewer men spending, fewer men taking on debt, fewer men fueling the consumer machine. The workforce is feeling it too. Fewer men entering high risk fields, fewer men willing to sacrifice their health for a system that doesn't care. The social structure is shifting. Fewer men getting married, fewer men starting families, fewer men participating in the institutions that used to define society. This isn't a temporary disruption, it's a fundamental realignment. And while the system struggles to adapt, men are thriving. They're living lives that are more fulfilling, more intentional, more aligned with who they are. They're not running from responsibility. They're running toward purpose. They're not abandoning society. They're building a new one that values authenticity over obligation. They're showing that there's another way to live, a way that doesn't require endless sacrifice, endless servitude, endless appeasement. They're proving that freedom is possible, that happiness is possible, that a life worth living is possible. And as they do, they're setting an example, not just for other men, but for everyone. This is the heart of what we're talking about today. Men walking away isn't about giving up, it's about waking up. It's about seeing the truth, rejecting the lies, and choosing a path that's yours on your terms. It's about taking back your power, your time, your energy, and using it to create a world that reflects who you are, not who you've been told to be. And as more men do this, the world is changing, not with a bang, but with a quiet, unstoppable forces. The system may fight back, but it's fighting a losing battle. Men have found their freedom, and they're not giving it up. We've been building to this moment, peeling back the layers of a seismic shift that's reshaping society as we know it. Men walking away isn't just a personal decision, it's a tidal wave, and it's crashing over everything we've been taught to believe about how the world works. The consequences are unfolding in real time, and they're stark, especially for women who've relied on men as a safety net for generations. At the same time, men are reaping rewards they never imagined possible: freedom, purpose, peace. This isn't a story of vengeance or triumph. It's a story of cause and effect, of choices and outcomes, of a system that pushed too far, and a group of people who finally said no more. Let's dive into the consequences for women, the rewards for men, and what this all means for the future. Let's start with the consequences for women because the fallout is impossible to ignore. For decades, women were sold a narrative that they didn't need men, that they could do it all on their own, that the state would step in if things got tough. This narrative was empowering on the surface, but it came with a hidden cost. It assumed men would always be there, quietly holding things together, ready to step in as Plan B. But men aren't Plan B anymore, they've walked away. And women are now facing a reality where the safety net they took for granted is gone. The economy is a perfect example. Inflation has driven the cost of living through the roof. Rent, groceries, utilities, everything's more expensive than ever. Without men to lean on, Whether for financial support, shared expenses, or even just someone to pick up the tab, many women are struggling to keep up. You see it everywhere, especially on social media. Women are posting videos, their voices trembling, talking about how they can't afford their bills, how they're working multiple jobs just to survive, how they're exhausted from trying to juggle it all. They're wondering why men aren't stepping in to help, why they're not offering to pay for dinners, cover rent, or send money through apps like they used to. These women aren't just venting, they're grappling with a world that's suddenly much harsher than they expected. The state, which promised to be their fallback, is stretched thin, its programs underfunded and overwhelmed. The welfare checks aren't enough. The subsidies can't keep up with inflation. And the jobs that used to sustain a comfortable life now barely cover the basics. This isn't about individual failures. It's about a system that overpromised and underdelivered, leaving women to face the consequences alone. The social consequences are just as profound. Women have long relied on men for emotional support, companionship, and stability, even if they didn't always acknowledge it. But as men walk away, those connections are fraying. Dating has become a minefield. Fewer men are approaching women. Fewer men are willing to invest time or energy in relationships that feel like a one-way street. Women are noticing the absence, fewer invitations to dinner, fewer offers to help with small tasks, fewer moments of connection that used to define their social lives. This isn't about men being cruel. It's about men prioritizing their own peace over relationships that often brought chaos. Women are left to navigate a world where the social safety net built on men's willingness to engage is unraveling, and the isolation is palpable. The cultural narrative isn't helping. For years, women were told they could have it all: career, independence, freedom without needing men. But the reality is messier. Many women are finding that the boss babe lifestyle, glorified on social media, is unsustainable. The grind of working long hours, managing households, and chasing an idealized version of success is taking its toll. Without men to share the load, whether financially, emotionally, or practically, the pressure is crushing. Social media amplifies this, with women openly questioning why life feels so hard, why the promises of independence haven't panned out. The answer lies in the absence of men, not as servants, but as partners who were once willing to collaborate in building a shared life. That collaboration is gone, and women are bearing the weight of a system that's collapsing under its own contradictions. But it's not just about economics or social dynamics, there's a deeper, more existential consequence. Women are starting to feel the void of purpose that comes with a society that's fractured along gender lines. Men and women were never meant to be adversaries. They were meant to complement each other, to build together, to create something greater than the sum of their parts. But decades of divisive rhetoric have eroded that complementarity, leaving women to navigate a world where the structures that once supported them, families, communities, relationships, are crumbling. The birth rate is plummeting, communities are shrinking, and the sense of shared purpose that used to hold society together is fading. Women are feeling this loss acutely, not just in practical terms, but in the quiet moments when they realize the future they were promised isn't coming. Now, let's shift gears and talk about the rewards for men, because this is where the story takes a turn toward hope and empowerment. When men walk away from a system that's been exploiting them, they don't just escape, they thrive. The first reward is freedom. For the first time in generations, men are living lives that aren't defined by obligation. They're not waking up every day to grind for a system that despises them, not sacrificing their health and happiness to meet someone else's expectations. This freedom is transformative. Men are choosing how to spend their time, their money, their energy. They're saying no to relationships that drain them, no to jobs that crush their souls, no to a society that demands their compliance. And in that space, they're discovering what it means to live for themselves. This freedom manifests in tangible ways. Men are hitting the gym, not to impress anyone, but to feel strong, to push their limits, to reclaim their physical vitality. They're picking up new skills, coding, woodworking, investing, not to climb some corporate ladder, but to enrich their lives, to create something meaningful. They're traveling, exploring, taking risks, not to escape, but to see the world through fresh eyes, to build memories that are theirs alone. This isn't about running from responsibility, it's about running toward purpose. Men are realizing that they don't need external validation to feel whole, that their worth isn't tied to what they can provide for others. They're enough, just as they are, and that realization is a reward more valuable than gold. Another reward is peace. Men who walk away are finding a calm they never knew was possible. The chaos of modern relationships, manipulative games, endless demands, constant criticism is gone. In its place is simplicity. Men are embracing minimalism, not just in their possessions, but in their entire approach to life. They're cutting out the noise, toxic friendships, draining obligations, pointless distractions, and replacing them with clarity. They're building lives that are leaner, more intentional, more aligned with who they are. This piece isn't just the absence of conflict, it's the presence of purpose, the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you're living on your terms. Men are also reaping the reward of community, not the kind imposed by society, but the kind they choose. As men walk away, they're finding others who share their values, who reject the old script and embrace authenticity. So these communities aren't about obligation, they're about mutual respect, shared goals, and a commitment to living well. Men are starting businesses together, pursuing passions, building networks that aren't tethered to the system's demands. They're mentoring each other, sharing knowledge, creating spaces where they can be themselves without judgment. This sense of brotherhood, of camaraderie, is a reward that's been missing for too long, and it's fueling a renaissance of masculine purpose. Perhaps the greatest reward is self discovery. Men are rediscovering who they are, stripped of the expectations that have defined them for generations. They're asking big questions. What do I want? What makes me happy? What kind of life do I want to build? And they're finding answers, not in the noise of society, but in the quiet of their own minds. They're learning to trust their instincts, to value their own judgment, to live by their own code. This self discovery is liberating. It's the realization that you don't need to prove yourself to anyone, that you don't need to sacrifice everything to be worthy. Men are finding their strength, their creativity, their joy, and it's changing them from the inside out. Let's talk about what this means for the future, because the consequences for women and the rewards for men aren't just a snapshot, they're a trajectory. The system that relied on men's compliance is crumbling, and it's not coming back. Women will continue to face the challenges of a world without men's support: higher costs, fewer connections, a fraying social fabric. Some will adapt, finding new ways to navigate this reality, but many will struggle, caught in the gap between the promises they were sold and the truth they're living. The state can't fill that gap, and the cultural narratives that fueled this divide are losing their grip. Society will have to reckon with the consequences of pushing men away, and it won't be easy. For men, the future is brighter. The rewards of freedom, peace, community, and self discovery are just the beginning. As more men embrace this path, they'll continue to build lives that are richer, more fulfilling, more authentic. They'll create new systems, economic, social, cultural, that reflect their values, not the values of a system that exploited them. They'll show the world that there's another way to live, one that doesn't require endless sacrifice or servitude. And as they do, they'll inspire others, not just men, but anyone who's tired of the old script, anyone who wants a life that's theirs, on their terms. This brings us to the heart of the story. Men walking away isn't about abandoning responsibility, it's about embracing it. It's about taking responsibility for your own happiness, your own purpose, your own life. It's about seeing through the lies, rejecting the manipulation, and choosing a path that's true. It's about building a world that reflects who you are, not who you've been told to be. And as men do this, they're not just changing their own lives, they're changing everything. The system may fight back, but it's fighting a losing battle. Men have found their freedom and they're not giving it up. And so, what do you think about all this? Do you agree with what we've discussed? Drop a comment below and share your thoughts. And I want to hear what's on your mind. This conversation is just getting started and your voice matters. Like the video if you liked it. Don't forget to subscribe. And if you found value in this, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Just remember, all roads lead to MWA, men walking away. Cheers.
Nothing says you care like crypto. Nothing can compare. Nothing says you care like crypto. Oh, nothing can compare to crypto.